Hello, and welcome to Ideology Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse.
And I'm your host, Brendan.
And today we have Phil on. And Phil, how would you describe yourself politically?
I'm a Marxist Leninist, which is a communist.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how has that been received, and how has that affected your life?
It doesn't affect my life too much because, one, not tons of people know that I'm a communist, and two, there's also not lots of opportunities for organization in my area. So, my life is, most like any other person's.
Yeah. So have you kept your beliefs or your ideology kind of secret on purpose, or has it just not ever come up in a big way?
Well, yeah, it's not. I mean, it's where I'm from is very, very much like the heart of the military-industrial complex, and that's where most people's sympathies lie. So it'd be really kind of an unpleasant conversation to have on the day-to-day.
Oh, yeah.
Especially where, a lot of politics, talking about it is not something people want to talk about necessarily anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, where did you kind of obtain this ideology? Because traditionally, people in America kind of grow up in a capitalistic society, and through school they're kind of taught about capitalism and kind of how communism was negative at a time. So I'm just curious to how you kind of gained that sort of ideology.
I guess I would say that the place where I came into contact with it is, actually through my education. You're right. While on the one hand we are taught, capitalist economics in school, and we learn, about famous, economists like Adam Smith and people like that, and of course the most famous, businessmen in America. But I was actually, rather privileged to take some advanced placement classes in high school and then go on to college, and I was exposed, to Marx and socialism there. And so I had access to those kinds of, knowledge of that literature early on.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what you said about your kind of how you interacted with other people around you. We're in Kentucky, and it's very it's kind of the same way. If you're like communist, or sometimes if you're left leaning in general, you kind of get a little bit discouraged from
Yes,
talking about
I've
it.
been there once to Lexington, and I was hosted by some people there, and I was put up in their son's room, who wasn't there at the time, and I thought it odd that he had in this corner of his room all these police statuettes. One of them was like the police, and it like holding a child, and they were all wrapped in the arms of an angel.
Really?
Yeah, it was very interesting. And then there was also all these large stables around.
Oh, yeah.
Which was pretty interesting.
Bluegrass state. Yeah, we love our horses here.
But it's no different here. And this is, the DFW area, Texas.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's pretty much no different. I mean, that said, there are some people. I'm kind of on the edge of it, but there are some people organizing. Like there's the DSA, who you've probably heard of, but most people who are Marxist-Leninist, they think that the DSA falls short of actually achieving anything. They criticize them as bourgeois, criticize them for having policemen in their leadership and things like that. And I'm honestly not that critical, but they're hardly a revolutionary organization.
So I've been to Dallas. We both have been to Dallas. On a we got what do you call it?
Our flight got delayed.
Yeah, our flight got delayed and we had to get a
course.
hotel. Yeah, and
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the DSA. Does that stand for Dallas Socialist Association?
Oh,
Or
no, that's a national organization, the Democratic Socialist Association.
oh, okay, of course. Yeah, that would make sense now.
And they're, I'm surprised you actually, have y'all not heard of them?
Now that you say it, I have, but I thought my brain was stuck in the context of Dallas.
Okay. Yes, they're quite well known now, and the thing is, so here's one of the cruxes of Marxism, Leninism, and that would be anti-imperialism.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, is that particularly Leninist, or is that something that is Marxist in its core?
yeah, it's both. Yeah, Marx dealt with empire quite a bit as well. Lenin went on to articulate it even more. So the thing about that is that America is an empire, and this is more or less plain to see when you concede that it has dozens of military bases and hundreds of countries.
Yes. We have like colonies as well out in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And
Thousands of troops.
Caribbean.
Just all across the globe. And the political reality is that any nation that has U.S. troops within its borders is more or less held at gunpoint. But this is also, perpetuates endless war. There's a term called mission creep, which you can see happening now in our involvement in Africa.
Would you care to define mission creep?
Mission creep is when, so you have actions going on, military operations going on in a different country, and let's say you pick up a casualty. Well, like we have in Niger with that recent ambush. Then you have people, then you have to, avenge that death, and then, this might lead to more casualties, and so it leads to a greater involvement over time, and not just in that way, but in other ways. As people get tied into the economy and our presence becomes more permanent and things like that. So, in any case, but also, that's really just the ostensible motive, as the case may be. What's actually happening, is the race for the resources there. That area is filled with oil, other mineral resources. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, which has suffered at the hands of brutal instability, is rich with the kind of minerals and stuff that goes into electronics and things like that. And so when we establish presence in places like these, it's all towards the end of extracting their resources.
I can agree with that. Yeah, that's visible.
The thing is, of course, the expense that the people that we act against in Iraq, and now it starts to seem like in Africa, that cost is, it costs them in pretty obvious ways, in their lives, and they're suffering, they're displaced, they become refugees. Here in America, we do have a bit of a high cost for imperialism as well. Take, for instance, the healthcare. If we had universal healthcare and also something like universal education, which the most basic socialist or communist state would demand universal healthcare and education. Say if we had these things, would we be able to garrison all of our military bases across the world? These are some of the major incentives that people look at when they join the military. But if these were just privileges, that ordinary Americans had, I think it's likely that the whole imperialist project would fall apart.
and it's the cost of it as well. We could probably or you know, it's feasible to imagine that the military would be you know, given less money in the budget compared to public education if it was funded, you know, accordingly, as you say.
Right. And from my perspective, I mean, these are just investments that should be made in the people outright.
Yeah.
They are rights, and they must be guaranteed.
A free education and free healthcare.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, basically, there's people. The whole potential of the nation is left to rot if they can't be guaranteed these things.
That's true. That's feasible. I want to go back to something you said about. So you stayed at that person's house in Lexington, and they had a statue of a police officer in their son's room. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just something I wouldn't want in my room.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the police in America? It's a very general question, but
well, naturally, I have really, negative opinions on the police. The police, and it seems to me, mostly, show up after crimes are committed. I'm not sure how many crimes cops actually commit. Prevent.
Yeah.
How many crimes they actually commit is
it's probably hard
a
to find that
separate
too.
issue.
Yeah.
But how many crimes do cops actually prevent? I'm not so sure. I'm not sure, but I do know that they serve to mostly, they enforce property ownership. They evict people from homes. They stop people from demonstrating. They mostly are there to enforce the status quo for the bourgeoisie, and that is the property owning class, the class that owns the means of production.
Yeah. So who would you define as the bourgeoisie in American society today?
Well, that would be the big company owners. Technically, small business owners are bourgeoisie. That's what we call the petty bourgeoisie, or petite bourgeoisie. And they're a separate issue on their own. I mean, but really, they're just like the tip of the iceberg. The real issues are the CEOs, the boards of the big near monopoly corporations. In the capitalist system that we participate in here in America, there's an illusion of choice, where whether it's the media or the food that you consume, most of that money flows back to one big corporation or just a few big corporations. And those are the people that are just unbelievably rich. And there's a whole, boards of people running these upper management of these places, not to mention the banks. So I would identify, the big owners and operators of the defense industry and the banks are probably the number one. The tip of the bourgeoisie class.
Yeah. Well, so if you were given imaginary control of the nation, how would you go about implementing what you would like to see changed? How would you go about implementing socialist revolution?
I see. Well, it would definitely come with a new constitution, a new means of government. Almost nothing would be the same. One of the first things that comes to mind would be a massive income tax. I would pretty much eliminate something like a millionaire or a billionaire, because the people, the amount of money or the amount of capital that these people have accumulated, property, things like that, are totally just beyond the needs of what an actual person or even a family really needs. So we'll take whatever excess that we can. Probably look at nationalizing certain industries, especially things like the defense industry, transportation. But of course, I'd also like to see an expansion of municipal authority, state authority, because, and then of course, healthcare, nationalize it, schools, nationalize them. And bring those all into step. Mostly where the biggest changes need to be made is in education, because this is where most people are socialized, and this is also where most people are being failed. Of course, probably no individual or society will ever be able to claim victory over ignorance, but as it stands right now, we have a major problem with it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to, personally, if I was, the guy in charge, see a massive elevation in the status of people like teachers, and definitely equip teachers with the means to educate. I think that's one thing that's not really well understood, or it's just clearly not valued enough. But in any case, let's see. There's also the various imperialist projects, going on. Like, for instance, there's Israel, which we support and send tons of money to. And it's just cruel what's going on there. What is Gaza, as beautiful as a city as it is? What is it now but a concentration camp for Palestinians created by invading Israeli people, who are not really a people. It's a fake nation.
Yeah.
But it would be broad change. The whole system of government. Perhaps the only thing that might be able to resemble anything like it was before was some of the courts, maybe.
Yeah, really.
But
so you would do away with like states? You do away, or would you keep states and abolish senators, or with that?
Yeah, senators especially. They're not that representative. But then also we have to, this is also a revolutionary context, and the revolution would need to be protected, because the bourgeoisie will hang on to any capital or any, chance of remaking capitalism.
People don't really like losing their money, so.
Exactly. So, something, I think that we're also dealing with a failure of democracy.
Right now?
Yeah, here and many other places. And that has been going on for quite some time. Democracies, like if we've seen, like for instance in Rwanda in the 90s, some of the riots in India in the 90s and early 2000s, even the most democratic states and of course America's wars, even the most democratic states are prone to the most unspeakable cruelty and crimes. So even though we had this idea coming out of World War II and the Cold War that this new era would be one of peace and prosperity, one that would free markets and liberal government would bring us, actually really hasn't been the case. I mean, I don't know how you view the world, but I don't think that's really going well.
For the spread of democracy and the winning the Cold War, you don't think that's gone well for the world? Do you think that's been detrimental?
Yeah, I think it's been very detrimental for people Iraq, for people in Syria. This isn't the era of the most refugees, most displaced people since World War II, because it's going great for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. But Russia, or the Soviet Union rather, they invaded Afghanistan during the Cold War.
Yeah, yeah, they got pretty torn up there, and yeah, in
So
Afghanistan by the CIA
yeah, didn't
Mujahideen.
the I don't know how you feel about the Soviet Union, but they were at least nominally a socialist country, and they practiced some pretty imperialistic policies in regards to the world stage.
I
From my
suppose
point of
so. You
view,
could
at
say
least.
that. Certainly. I've heard that critique leveled at the
Mhm.
USSR before. Um,
I'm not saying that excuses
being,
anyone. I'm just yeah.
oh yeah, certainly. No, this is all very civil. Um, the thing, the USSR, especially in its later stages, the
Mhm.
Khrushchev era and things like that, they had more or less lost sight of the. Some critics will say that they had then lost sight of the Marxist-Leninist.
Uh,
Uh, that would have been the last person that would have really held that up would have been Stalin, who, of course, started had the first few winning moves of the space race, which of course the USSR won pretty
mhm.
handily. Um, Saved the world from Hitler via the blood of 25 million
Yeah,
Russians.
quite a lot of German blood too.
Uh,
but
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, people, of course, criticize Stalin for being a heavy-handed dictator, but as far as what he did for Russia, lifting it out of poverty, I mean, it was a backwards nation. I think um, what he did for the Russian people and the world is ultimately a net
mhm.
good at the
Yeah,
least when it's talking about that. But then later on, yeah, the incursions into Afghanistan um, and things like that. I mean, I can't really say how just
mhm.
those were. Um, but I can say that the USSR, despite what it had become, was still on its way to, caring for its people uh, even better and better every year, feeding its people better and better every year, and that um, the Russian people suffered immediately after the fall of the USSR and have only begun to recover, and at what cost? I mean, they've been involved in several
Mhm.
wars within and outside their
Yeah,
borders,
and now
depending
they
on who
have
you ask.
Putin in charge, which is not entirely fortunate for them or for many other people.
Right, yes, yeah, you'd certainly hate to be, I guess,
Yeah.
opposed to him. It might not end
No.
up so well for you.
End up committing suicide via the back of your head. Shooting yourself.
Right, or that guy that they poisoned with that
Oh
polonium
yeah,
stuff.
I did
You
hear
ever hear
about
about
that.
that? Yeah, pretty wild. But yeah, Russia, is now an
Yes.
oligarchy uh, run by business magnates and people like Putin, and so that
Yeah,
sucks.
it's probably not great for them. Um,
On the other hand, they've done great to prop up like the Syrian regime, um, which, despite its shortcomings, um, must be protected because the alternatives are American puppet state, Kurdish
mhm.
YPG, or Mujahideen CIA
Yeah.
rebels.
Well, didn't you're talking about the Assad regime, right? Um,
Yes.
didn't he use chemical weapons to kill civilians?
Mm, supposedly,
Hmm.
some people, it's a problematic, even for me to discuss that, because yeah, that might be true, but also that might just be some kind of propaganda uh, or a ruse by rebels. I've even heard these suggestions, because also, you'll hear rumblings of about it in the news before these things even happen. It almost seems like too good to be true. But also, if on the other hand, if they really were, I'll concede that if they were some kind of made up thing by the rebels or the CIA, as the case may be, no one's really seized those chances to capitalize on them, I think, as far as an intervention or otherwise. So yes, unfortunately, it does seem to be the case, but one must understand that the people now opposing the Assad regime are literally Al-Qaeda. So, I mean, you can pick one or the other. I don't know which one I'd pick.
Yeah. Another thing about Stalin is I've read about the famine in Ukraine from, I think, 1930 to 32, and about, I believe, 7 million Ukrainians reportedly died in the famine.
Yeah, once again, most people will probably take you up on your sources. I mean, I really, I'm kind of reluctant to comment on that. I think the things that I would say were that, one, like I mentioned before, is that the USSR was not an industrialized nation. That famines happened before the Civil War, during the Civil War, especially around wartime, and that was also, of course, during the Great Depression, which was, of course, a global depression. Was there a famine and then people died? Of course, yes, people died in famines there as they had before. The thing about that famine is that people insist that it was targeted at the Ukrainians in some kind of ethnic cleansing or something like that, but that's just so far removed from the actual platform and ideology of the USSR. It's just an unfortunate thing that happened because the USSR hadn't industrialized yet. It was still basically using medieval agriculture.
Okay, so I think an interesting point was brought up earlier that people don't like to lose money. So I feel like a big motivator in capitalism is like the idea of getting ahead, of making lots of money, of living a luxurious lifestyle. I feel like that motivates people to work, to go get an education. How do you feel people would react in a more communistic state of way without necessarily that motivation to own their own house, to make lots of money, and that sort?
Yeah, certainly. That is one thing that I've discussed that I feel a little bit more prepared to discuss. Yeah, because there, people are motivated. Some people would say, like, well, how do you expect for innovation to take
lots
place?
Of competition in America.
Without competition. But, that doesn't mean that there isn't competition, among groups of scientists under communism to innovate or to, get the awards for, like, the best idea. But I guess before I get ahead of myself, as technology progresses, we are replacing more and more people with automation to the point where there's just not going to be enough work. Where work, humans will be taken out of the equation probably at some point. Are we just going to find more like signs for people to flip on the corners as more work just gets automated and automated? Eventually, we have to redistribute the profits that are actually just being made by robots. I mean, why? So your job gets automated, but your boss still owns the company, and so instead of paying you a wage, he has a robot now, and you don't have a job, but he's still making as much money as he did before, if not more. That will be still reaping all the profits, but your circumstances won't improve unless you're one of those. As far as getting ahead goes, you really just need to reevaluate like what the hell is important in life. I would suggest maybe that work is not so important, and that the important work will get done because the important work does get done. Whether it's innovation or it's productivity, people have shown over and over again that they will do it. People did it before capitalism, and people will do it afterwards. Some people, when they talk about innovation, especially, they also, forget the old maxim that necessity is the mother of invention. That people will keep on inventing, keep on producing, anyway. And, a lot of the reasons that people want to get ahead anyway is because they want to get like good health insurance. They want to send their kids to a good school or something. But if that's possible already anyway, if you're already not going to work a lot of hours anyway because the technology is so great, we're just talking about a radical shift in the whole structure of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because even now, even without the automation, widespread automation, there's still just tons of people serving to enrich fewer people, just a few people. And maybe it would be easier to get ahead if you were pocketing more of that yourself instead of sending it, half of it or a third of it, whatever, to the boss. And if you could just maybe eliminate that portion you give to the boss, say you kept half that portion, give the other half to the tax man on top of what you're already giving to the tax man, well then, man, you've got great hospitals, maybe even great public housing. Because right now, public housing is thought of as something that's like total shit.
Yeah,
and it is. Yeah. But I don't think that we can count on the private sector to efficiently use land. Especially around here in Texas, the way we build is just wildly inefficient. There's no mind to the future at all. We build so wide.
Dallas is so big
flat
in terms of area.
It's just caution to the wind, and there's no opportunity for efficient public transit. It's just one of the most inefficient places I've ever seen. So in any case, as far as getting ahead goes, I think I'd say that the person that's holding you back is the freaking man, the boss.
That's fair. Yeah. So in your socialist system, would you not have automated labor, or would you have a mixed, kind of some automated, but if you do have if you do have a lot of unemployed people, would you remove automation? You know what I mean? Am I making sense?
Yeah, of course. I think on the one hand, eventually people would just end up working less and less, and they would have to find some other way to enjoy their lives besides work. Perish the thought, right? But there will always probably be like the work rotation. One of the fundamental things is that there's basically just a labor pool. There's kind of a give and take to these things. Maybe one day out of the week, or maybe 1 week out of the month, bro, you might have to be a garbage man. I'm sorry.
In your perfect system.
But,
yeah.
But you probably wouldn't do the same job all the time.
Really? So, that's interesting. So,
at least for like unskilled labor, not making any assumptions about you.
I know. You're fine.
But of course, probably it's not like in the case of teachers or doctors, they're not like they're going to be switching jobs all the time. But for certain things, there will probably be some rotation. And like in the case of things like teachers, I don't know if that could be automated too well.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Could have, I've heard people say you could have one teacher teach 1,000 kids through some software, some video software, which would be interesting. You'd probably still need monitors to make sure kids are still actively listening. But
Yeah. But I think one thing, I think a lot more things would be more communal. In the capitalist society that we've created, things have become more individualized, uh, especially food production and food consumption is all very individual. Whereas in the past was a more communal thing, especially production, in the village form and things like that. Um, I don't know. In some respects, you would see, a more communal attitude, especially. I think Marx may have even described it in that chapter, but he said that like children and teaching would be communal. The whole families would be more together, even if they weren't like related to each other. It's a more social thing, because I think right now individualism runs rampant, and that we're even separated from our neighbors in a big way. But I think you'd see a return to a more social, atmosphere and things like that. I think that a lot of things around here are kind of, people are closed off from each other. Like, especially if you see in the suburbs, how spread out everybody is, and they erect fences between one another. So the suburbs are especially messed up. But that's a whole different issue. Let's see. I mean, I don't know. What else, guys?
Well, we're coming close to actually wrapping up. So, do you have anything that you want to leave us on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I was wondering. I guess I was wondering about you guys. Like, what do you? I mean, of course, communism isn't very palatable to many people, but what does I don't know. Did I make any good points to you guys?
I thought so.
Yeah,
I thought what
I
you said
agree.
was really interesting. Honestly, both of us we're pretty young and green and fresh to the whole political scene, and to the whole scene, to the world at all. We're young, and yeah, you made some really interesting points that I'm definitely gonna read up on after we end this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I was just I thought this was an interesting opportunity, and I wish you guys success.
Thank you.
Getting the word out. I'll retweet you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thanks again for having me on here. It's always good to talk. And
Thank you
yeah,
very
best of
much.
luck.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
You're welcome.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye, y'all.
So that was Phil. He's a Marxist-Leninist, and he made some very interesting points.
We'd like to thank him for being on the show, as well as thank you guys for watching or listening.
Have a good day.